Welcome to the Deep Dive Books channel, where we hope you find something valuable every day.
Recently, I conducted some research on China's economy. Today, I'll share a few insights. Let's talk about why Chinese incomes are lower than those in developed countries. Some might disagree, thinking China is already a developed country. For example, if you earn hundreds of thousands of yuan annually in China, your standard of living, the goods, services, and food you can enjoy, might surpass that of a developed country. But that's because China has a large number of low-income workers serving you. The fine craftsmanship behind a dish costs valuable labor, something developed countries can't afford. China now has a large middle-income group whose collective purchasing power rivals that of any developed nation. However, we must acknowledge that overall income levels in China are still not high. Take median annual income. Meaning half the population earns more, and half earns less. A typical Chinese person has to work 227 hours to buy an iPhone, while people in France, the UK, Belgium, South Korea, Germany, and Japan need only work 70 to 90 hours. In the US, it's just 50 hours. In China's wealthiest areas, the highest median monthly wages are in Beijing and Shanghai. In 2020, these were 6,906 yuan and 6,378 yuan, respectively. By comparison, California's minimum wage is $14 per hour, which, when converted to monthly earnings, is about double the median wage in Beijing and Shanghai. And California's housing prices are lower than those in Beijing and Shanghai. What defines a developed country? One key feature is that life is relatively easy for its people. In the US, as long as someone stays in school, avoids drugs and crime, and doesn't have children too early, they can graduate high school and support a family with a steady job. When Chinese tourists visit the US, they often remark how affordable things are compared to local incomes. The affordability is so noticeable that many American habits seem wasteful. So, why can't a Chinese worker afford an iPhone despite working longer hours? Chinese people generally score higher on IQ tests than Americans. Chinese students spend far more time studying than their American counterparts, and their exam questions are tough enough to make students in developed countries sweat. On average, Chinese people work over 2,200 hours per year, while Americans and Japanese work less than 1,800 hours, and Europeans often work fewer than 1,600 hours. China's high-tech companies are accustomed to overtime, but there's no 996 culture in developed countries. The broader trend is clear. The more developed a country is, the fewer hours its people work, and the less effort they need to make. If Chinese people work more, why are their incomes lower? Some may immediately say that developed countries exploit developing ones. However, China is now one of the strongest advocates of free trade, while the US complains that Chinese goods are too cheap and pushes for the yuan to appreciate so that US exports can compete in China. The US does benefit from the dollar's dominance, but this mainly helps America borrow money globally, not directly increase wages. Moreover, European countries, Japan, and South Korea don't have currency dominance, yet their citizens' incomes are high. Blaming external factors won't help us progress. It's a victim mentality. Others might argue, it's because capitalists are too greedy. But China largely operates under a market economy where wages are determined by the market. If one capitalist is too greedy, another will offer slightly higher wages and attract workers. Southern China's labor shortages have persisted for over a decade. Wage differences across countries undoubtedly have political influences, but from a market perspective, they are quite fair. For example, in global talent markets, Chinese wages are on par with those in developed countries. Scientists, top executives, key R&D personnel, artists, athletes, and airline pilots possess global skills, making them valuable anywhere. Their wages aren't restricted by geography. In fact, China often offers higher pay than the US to attract and retain top talent. In the past, people would say a scientist, gave up lucrative foreign opportunities and chose to return to China. Now, the situation has reversed, and top-level tech professionals often receive better pay in China than they would in the US. You might even admire those who gave up lucrative Chinese offers to stay abroad for research. Market forces also ensure that Chinese flight attendants earn wages comparable to their American counterparts. The planes, fuel, and pilots are the same, and so are the ticket prices. Chinese airlines are fully capable of offering flight attendants the same wages as in the US, which is why they attract higher-caliber attendants than their American peers. However, in most other industries in China, including doctors, civil servants, teachers, general managers, technicians, and factory workers, not to mention service workers, incomes are generally lower than in the US. This, too, is driven by market forces, as employers can only afford to pay so much, and that amount is enough to hire workers. The market is fair, but since goods can flow freely while people can't, the world is not entirely fair to individuals. Globally, a person's income is determined not by how hard they work, but by where, with whom, and what they do. For example, a nurse in China may earn around 70,000 yuan a year, facing significant financial pressure, while in the US, a nurse can earn $70,000, enough to support a family on a single income. Chinese nurses have low incomes partly because the patients they serve have low incomes, and partly because that income is sufficient to attract nurses in China. These two reasons are essentially the same. China doesn't offer many high-income jobs. The reason China lacks many high-income jobs is that its productivity levels are not high enough. One of the most obvious gaps is in agriculture. Since Chinese incomes are low, many people assume labor costs in China are low. However, an awkward, even alarming fact is that China's agricultural labor costs are much higher than those in the US. The most recent data I found is from 2015. Labor costs for corn, rice, wheat, soybeans, and cotton in China were 14.78 times, 4.11 times, 16.33 times, 8.5 times, and 28.23 times higher than in the US, respectively. This is because the level of mechanization in US agriculture far exceeds that in China. In the US, machines do the work, while in China, it's done by people. Additionally, US mechanized agriculture produces significantly higher yields than China's manual labor-intensive methods. Even when factoring in machine costs, the total cost per acre of corn, rice, wheat, soybeans, and cotton in China still exceeds that of the US by 56.05%, 20.82%, 210.42%, 38.44%, and 222.84%, respectively. The US has more arable land than China. Only 2% of the US population is engaged in agriculture, with about 3 million actually working in the sector. Yet these workers not only feed the entire US population but also make the US the world's largest exporter of agricultural products. China has around 500 million people engaged in agriculture, with about 260 million actively working in the field. Yet, since 2012, China has been the world's largest importer of agricultural products. China's high agricultural costs mean the government purchases domestic crops at prices higher than those of imports from the US or other international markets. In other words, if not for protecting Chinese farmers and considering national food security, China would live off imported grain, and farmers could focus on other ventures, like aquaculture. Despite this protection, Chinese farmers still have low incomes. China produces the widest range of industrial products in the world, and Chinese manufacturing is everywhere. China's supply chain is unrivaled, and exports are the strongest driver of its economic growth. However, while China manufactures large quantities, it does not capture most of the profits. Most iPhones are assembled in China, but what does China gain from producing iPhones? A typical iPhone sells for $999 to US consumers, but China, specifically Foxconn's labor, earns just $8.46 per phone. Less than 1% of the retail price. You might say, why not let Chinese companies make money? I'll buy domestic brands. Sure, but domestic phones have slim profit margins. Apple only holds 10% to 15% of global smartphone shipments but captures 60% to 80% of the profits. Samsung ranks second with 15% to 20% of the profits. All other brands, including Chinese ones like Xiaomi, Vivo, and Huawei, have high shipment volumes but thin profit margins. They either target low-end markets with low-cost models or pursue high-end configurations with high costs. Only Apple can offer mid-level configurations at premium prices, and people still buy it. Apple enjoys the benefits of being at the top of the industry. Phones may be a unique case, but most other products follow similar patterns. Across all products, for every dollar American consumers spend on items labeled, "Made in China," 55 cents actually go to purchasing American components and services. China does make money from "Made in China" products, but not that much. We take pride in Chinese manufacturing, but the majority of modern business profits are made in R&D, design, sales, and services. Not in manufacturing itself. China's productivity issues aren't just about labor. They're also about natural resources, like water. China's average water use per person is 400 cubic meters per year, 1/4 of that in the US and half of the international standard for water scarcity. Does this mean China is conserving water? Not really. Only 40% of China's industrial water is recycled, compared to 85% in the US. While China has made some progress in water pollution control, the situation remains severe. In China, each cubic meter of water used in production yields $8, whereas in Europe, it's $58. The lower water usage per capita in China is not due to better conservation but because China is extremely water scarce. Despite this, China still lacks the capability to conserve water efficiently in production. By the end of 2021, several provinces in China experienced power outages due to a coal shortage, an unprecedented event since the reform and opening up era. This highlights the urgent need for China to improve its productivity levels. We aim to save energy, reduce emissions, and increase efficiency. We want to generate wealth through more advanced methods and avoid expending excessive human and material resources for minimal output. Including all working individuals, data from 2017 shows that the average GDP created per hour by a worker in China was $10.68, compared to $65.51 in the US and $43.35 in Japan. China's per capita productivity is less than 1/6 of that in the US and 1/4 of Japan's. Chinese incomes are low due to low productivity levels, and low productivity is due to low technological content. Today's economic achievements in China are largely due to the labor of blue-collar workers. Chinese enterprises are still at the stage of imitation and price competition, not yet driving economic growth through innovation. Some may believe China is already a developed country, but perhaps the data presented today will provide a sense of urgency. We have indeed achieved remarkable progress in various fields like economy, technology, and manufacturing. However, a true patriot should not only admire these achievements but also have a sense of urgency to address problems and seek change. That concludes today's content.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.